All right, so let's go ahead and begin. All right. So today we're going to be talking about like the different like parts of the cell, basically, right? So you guys have probably done some of this before, right? Like, do you remember like some like can you name for me like any parts of the cell?
Um, the the mitochondria, brother.
Mm-hmm. Mitochondria.
Um, it's the what's it called? The cell wall, brother. Actually, no, plant cells have cell walls.
Yeah, yeah. So
The
plant cells.
nucleus.
Yeah. So plant cells, right? Animal cells,
Yeah,
nucleus. Right. Very good.
yeah, the nucleus.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Um, what's it called, brother? I can't remember the name. The thing that it's surrounded by.
Cell membrane, cell wall,
Yes, the membrane, brother.
membrane.
The
Right. Very good.
membrane.
All right. Very good. So yeah. So we're going to be talking about. So this lesson is going to be pretty easy. Like there's nothing really complex here. You just got to sit down, like go through and remember the names of what are these different things, right? So probably you studied most of this before. This is just like the different parts of the cell. So we're going to be looking at the eukaryotic cell today, right? So
Uh,
what is the other kind of cell? We talked about one other kind of cell, right?
Prokaryotic cell, brother.
Prokaryote, right? And do you remember like any of the differences between eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells?
Prokaryotes are less complex.
Mm-hmm. Less complex, right?
They don't have cell membranes. They don't have membranes for each organelle. Like they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm saying? They're
Right,
just kind of just all over the place.
right, exactly, right. So we're not going to be talking about prokaryotes today. We're going to be talking about the different kinds of membrane-bound organelles and other parts of the eukaryotic cell, right? So those different things like the mitochondria and so on, those are called organelles, right? Those are called organelles. So those are the different parts of the cell, right?
Uh,
So let's take a look at what are some of the structures. So first of all, let's take a look at plant cells versus animal cells. I think we talked a little bit last time. So most things, right? You can see here, most things belong to both, right? Most things belong to both animal cells and plant cells, right? But animal cells, they have some differences, right? They don't have a cell wall and they don't have chloroplasts at all. These things, they don't have at all, right? So plant cells, they have like a thick cell wall and they have chloroplasts, right? Now, in terms of vacuoles, we're going to be looking at pictures of vacuoles. The plant cells have large vacuoles and the animal cell is going to have only a small vacuole, right? So we're going to take a look at pictures of those. Like, what does that mean? That plant cells have very large vacuoles, but animal cells only have small vacuoles. Right. So, yep. All right. So both of them have a cell membrane. Right. So take a look here. On the left is the animal cell, and on the right is the plant cell. So the animal cell on the outside has a cell membrane. Right. It's also called the plasma membrane. The same thing.
mm.
So this is the outermost layer. Now in the plant cell, they have a cell membrane. Okay. But outside of that, they have another layer that's called a cell wall that's a lot thicker and helps to maintain the structure of the plant cell. So the structure of a plant cell is like much more defined and much more resilient than an animal cell, right? So the cell membrane and other kinds of things, they do give the animal cells structures, but they're not as strong as a plant cell, right? Because the plant cell has a cell membrane, right? So remember, it doesn't have the cell membrane, it doesn't have the cell wall in place of the cell membrane. It has
Mm.
both, right? All right. Now, inside of the cell, there's something called the nucleus, right? And that's where the DNA is, right? Um, Now, within that, you have something called the nucleolus, right? So the nucleolus is kind of like the nucleus of the nucleus, that kind of thing, right?
All right.
So the nucleolus is the center that makes ribosomes, right? So the DNA is located here within the
But what do
nucleus.
ribosomes do, brother?
So ribosomes, they make proteins.
Oh, all right, all right.
So so the nucleolus first makes the ribosomes, right? And then after that, the ribosomes go outside into the rest of the cell, and then those ribosomes, they make proteins in the rest of the cell outside, right? But the ribosomes are first made here in the nucleolus. All right, so let me bring up the share screen here.
So the
Okay,
nucleolus is where ribosomes are made. All right.
all right, that's where the ribosomes are made, right? So the nucleus has the DNA, and the nucleolus has the ribosomes, right?
So the nucleus has DNA and the nucleolus has ribosomes.
Correct. So the nucleolus doesn't have ribosomes; it just makes them.
Yeah, it makes ribosomes.
It makes them, and then the ribosomes they leave.
Uh-huh.
Right. Now this is called the mitochondria. Right. So for you, have you heard of the mitochondria before? What does the mitochondria do? Mm-hmm. Right. So it's basically gonna produce energy, right? So it takes the
Uh-huh.
sugar and other molecules, right, and then it kind of burns it to create ATP, and that powers everything in the cell, right? So this is the mitochondria. So the mitochondria looks like this. It has like inner and outer membranes.
So
And
mitochondria create MTP. I mean ATP.
right, they create the ATP.
Oh, all right.
Right. Now, right outside of the nucleus, right, you notice that we have the nucleus right in the center, right? So this right here is going to be the nucleus, right? You notice
Uh-huh.
like right around it, right
Uh-huh.
outside of it, you're going to have all these layers and layers of things. This is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, right? So why is it called rough? Because on the surface, it kind of looks rough, right? Because it has all these ribosomes on it, right? So remember we said the nucleolus, the yellow, that produces the ribosomes, and they go outside. So one of the
Uh-huh.
places they go is to the rough ER, right? So when they go there, they attach here, and then they go there and they make proteins, right?
Wait, so hold up. So the nucleolus makes ribosomes, which makes proteins.
Right.
I see.
Okay. So there's two kind now in this picture, right? We see the rough ER, right? The rough endoplasmic reticulum, right?
Uh,
We have also the smooth ER, right? So what's the difference for you have between the rough ER and the smooth ER? Right. So what is it that makes the rough ER rough and the smooth ER doesn't have this thing that makes it rough? The outside of it doesn't have what? Those little dots, right? What are those little dots? Yeah, so what are all those like small dots that are on the rough ER but not on the smooth ER? Not sure. Yusuf, what do you remember?
those are ribosomes, brother.
Ribosomes, right? So remember the smooth ER does not have ribosomes. That's why they call it smooth. Right?
Wait, brother, are mitochondria proteins or not?
So mitochondria is made of proteins, but it's not like one protein. It's like a big organelle that has a lot of proteins in it.
Okay, so the mitochondria is still made of proteins, right?
Yeah, it's made of proteins, right?
Hmm.
Right. So the smooth ER, right? Is it going to make proteins? Yes or no?
No.
No, right? Because it doesn't have the ribosomes, right? So it does other things. Uh, it's important for like transporting things. It makes lipids. We talked about lipids, right? Like the fats and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So there's other things that the smooth ER does, right? But it's not going to be making proteins like the rough ER, right?
Mhm.
Now, right, we talked about this a little bit, right? So these are ribosomes, right? So if we zoom in, we have the ribosomes, right? So ribosomes could be either attached to the rough ER like this, right? So about half of them are attached there, and about half of them are just kind of floating around um,
Mhm.
in the cell, like random places. They're just floating around in the cytoplasm and making proteins. So about half are attached here, and about half of the ribosomes are floating around all over the place, right? So if you zoom in, this is kind of what it looks like here on the right, right? Remember, so what is it producing here, Freeha? If you take a look at this picture, what does it look like it's producing right over here? Right here on the right. Right. So you notice this is amino acid chain, right? What is that? Like, what is this being produced right over here?
RNA, brother. It says RNA.
All right. Right. So Yusuf, what do you think? It says amino acid chain. What is this right here? Amino acid chain.
Brother, since it's making amino acids, it's obviously making proteins, brother.
It's making proteins, right? You see this? Right.
Yeah.
So, Freeha, do you remember from the previous lesson? Right. You see those little dots? right? All these little circles are amino acids that have been joined together into one big string, right? So that's where it's slowly one by one is attaching one amino acid. Another amino acid comes and attaches it one by one, right? So the string kind of slowly elongates before it's let go, right? So that's how this ribosome, it makes proteins, right? Now, you see this thing here down here, it says mRNA, right?
Yeah.
So why is mRNA here, right? Because I thought this thing was making proteins. Why is there RNA here?
Whether the proteins make RNA, I would assume.
Mhm.
Proteins make RNA, right?
So the mRNA that provides the instructions as to how to make some kind of protein.
Oh,
See
yes.
that?
So what's the M for?
So that means messenger,
Oh, okay, okay.
right?
Messenger RNA.
Right.
Yeah, because RNA delivers DNA instructions, right?
Exactly, right. So that's exactly right. So the mRNA was copied from the DNA, right? The DNA provides initial instructions. So that's why this is kind of like the messenger between the RNA and the ribosome, right? See that is bringing the information here. So that's why it's called messenger RNA, right? All right. So now we have the Golgi apparatus, right? So the Golgi apparatus, right? It looks a little bit kind of like the smooth ER. So don't be confused by that, right? This looks a little bit like the smooth ER, but it's not close to the rough ER. It's usually like a little bit farther out in the cell, right? And it's not really going to be attached to the rough ER, right? So the Golgi apparatus does a lot of different things, right? It basically, like once the rough ER, right, has made some proteins, right? The Golgi apparatus, right, those proteins often they can go different places, but one of the main things that happens is that it gets sent to the Golgi apparatus, right? So we talked about the rough ER, right? The rough ER makes the proteins, and then it sends it to the Golgi apparatus.
So what is the
And
Golgi apparatus? Is a smoothie R? Is that what it is?
no, it's different. I'm
Oh,
saying
it's
it
a
kind of
whole different thing.
yeah, I'm
All
saying it
right.
kind of looks a little bit like it,
Uh-huh.
right? But basically, from the rough ER, it receives like packages of proteins, right? And then in the Golgi apparatus, those they get modified. Like some amino acids are added, some are removed. Maybe some sugar pieces are added to it, right?
Uh-huh.
There's something called glycoproteins, which is like protein and sugar put together.
Uh-huh.
So some proteins, right? The carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, those are added. Those added in big chains to the proteins. Different things like that. So the protein is modified, changed, and then it's transported other places, right? So it says here it is also known as the post office of the cell, right? So the post office, what does it do? It sends things different places, right? It sends things all over the place. So the Golgi apparatus gets some proteins, it kind of changes it, modifies it, decides what to do with it, and then in a vesicle budding off here, it sends it off to wherever it's supposed to go. It kind of makes sense.
Mhm.
So when the proteins leave the rough ER, they're usually not finished yet. Usually, most of the time, they have to
Uh-huh.
come here. They have to be finished and processed and organized, and then they're sent to the right place. All right.
Mhm.
All right. Let's go to this one. This is called the lysosome. All right. So Freeha, do you know what the lysosome does? All right. It can break. All right. So it breaks down food. Right. So this is kind of like the recycling center of the cell. Right. So when things basically, so it does different things. So it can break down food in the cell. Um, but mostly what it does is like when things get old and stuff like that, right? When there's stuff there that you just need to kind of destroy and start over again, right? Let's
Mhm.
say you have some old proteins, right? You have
Mhm.
some old proteins, they've been used up, there's some damage to it, whatever, right? Or that thing isn't needed anymore, right? Then then the lysosome kind of attaches to it and is filled, that lysosome is filled with all kinds of like really acidic material, enzymes, right? It's kind of like the stomach,
Uh-huh.
right? And so the stomach, what does it do? It like digests and breaks everything down, right? So then you can build it back up in some other way. So
Mhm.
that's what the lysosome does. It attaches to something, it breaks it all down into pieces, and then like the protein gets broken down into individual amino acids, and then now those
Mhm.
amino acids can be used again for something else. That kind of makes
Uh-huh.
sense. So I would say the lysosome is kind of like the stomach of the cell, or you could say it's kind of like the recycling center of the cell. Both of those, I think, analogies kind of work. Right now we have this thing called the vacuole. Right. So the vacuole, right, it's different in animal cells and plant cells, right? Both animal cells and plant cells have a vacuole, right? But what is a vacuole? It's basically like kind of like a large place. You can think of it as kind of like a lake, where, or like an aquifer, where like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of water and food and maybe some chemicals, stuff like that, are just stored. So you think of it as like it's like a big bubble of water in the cell, right?
Uh-huh.
Now in a plant cell, they often have large vacuoles. You see this, right? So most plant cells they have like big vacuoles, like a good amount of space is taken up by the vacuole.
Mm-hmm.
But in animal cells, in human cells, you know, bat cells, whatever it is, monkey cells, the vacuoles are just like small vacuoles all over the place. Just
Uh-huh.
small vacuoles, right? So the vacuoles in animal cells they don't take up much space. These small bubbles of water and other chemicals and things, it can store nutrients, water, or waste. These are small, and the plant cell is very big.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons is that for plant cells, right? So animal cells they have skeletons and other kinds of things to maintain structure. For plant cells, right? They don't have that. What they need oftentimes is that they just need like almost like water pressure to keep the plant upright, right?
Uh-huh. So
Like
like to keep it structured, right?
exactly, right? Like for example, have you guys ever done these experiments where you take like a piece of lettuce, right? And you put
Mm-hmm.
in salt water, right? Which is kind of like with osmosis kind of takes all the water away, right? What happens to the lettuce?
I've never done that.
You
So.
know that? So it's gonna like wilt, right? It's gonna
Oh,
wilt
right.
and become floppy, right? But when it's fresh with a lot of water, right, it maintains its structure, right?
Oh, so you're sucking this. You're using salt to suck the water out.
Right, exactly, right,
Oh, okay. So the basically the water stored inside its cells gets sucked out in the vacuole.
right,
Oh,
right.
I see.
So when the plant cells they have a lot of water in the vacuole and just in general, there's water everywhere, right? That water pressure is keeping everything straight upright, right? Gives the plant structure, gives like a leaf structure, right? When you take
Mm.
that water away from the vacuole, then it becomes wilted and like falls over, right? Like if you imagine like if you have a some grass outside, right? How does a blade of grass, stand up, right? It doesn't have bones, right?
Mm.
Right. So what is it? Most of it is like all this water pressure that's kind of holding
Mm.
it up. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know if there's like a better
Yeah.
analogy.
No, no, that makes sense,
Right.
brother. That
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So vacuoles are very very important, especially in plant cells. Right. Now another thing that's different about animal cells and plant cells is that plant cells they have this thing called a chloroplast, right? So Freya, what does a chloroplast do? Why does a plant cell have a chloroplast and not an animal? So it gives it color, right? But so why is it there? Apart from the color, like what does it do? So it makes food, right? So this is where photosynthesis is going to occur, right? So you
Mm.
can see in this plant cell on the right, right? There's like a bunch of chloroplast in there, right? So the chloroplast looks like this on the left. There's all these stacks of um, of these things called thylakoids, right? See all these stacks of things in there, right?
Mm.
So this chloroplast it has chlorophyll in it, and it makes this is what makes the sugar and all that stuff in the plants.
Okay.
Right?
So chloroplasts produce. Okay. So chloroplast is only in plant cells.
Only in plant cells, right?
So that's what makes food for the plant cell in
Right,
photosynthesis.
correct. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. Let me see. So as you have seen each organelle. All right. So in this case, what they're saying here is just that like just as each organelle, mitochondria, chloroplast does different things, there are different cells that also do different things. There are liver cells that do different things, and heart cells, stuff like that.
Uh.
All right. So I think that was it. There wasn't. I think the lesson was pretty short. So what we'll do. Let's do two things. So